The influence of Clara Schumann upon the music of her husband Robert is difficult to overestimate. Even by current standards, their relationship was remarkable, and within the context of mid-19th century Germany, extremely unusual. Clara was the family's breadwinner. By the time the Schumanns married in 1840, she was well established as one of Europe's great pianists and commanded concert fees commensurate with that status. Meanwhile, Robert became a sort of house husband, albeit with the assistance of a housekeeper and a cook. His devotion to parenting their 7 children was extraordinary. In contrast to the distant reserve with which most 19th century fathers approached their offspring, Robert nurtured his with storytelling, walks, games, conversations, and the creation of a children's diary in which he documented significant events in their lives. The Schumanns' domestic life was sustained by an almost religious veneration for art, which they saw as a portal into the highest realms of the mind and spirit. And although their relationship was more complex than it's often portrayed, its intimacy, in which romantic love and artistic commitment were inextricably linked, was profound. Clara's insights, her vitality, and her very being are commemorated in Robert's music, often with remarkable specificity. His work is filled with melodic figures and note combinations that functioned as barely coded messages, both to her and about her. Clara was also Robert's artistic guide on a practical level. Until 1840, he had written piano music almost exclusively, but in that year of their marriage, he suddenly turned to songwriting, composing an astonishing 138 lieder. While Clara understood that this explosion of creativity was connected to the finalizing of their union after years of implacable opposition from her father, she harbored greater ambitions for her husband. It would be best if he composed for orchestra. His imagination cannot find sufficient scope on the piano. His compositions are all orchestral in feeling. My highest wish is that he should compose for orchestra. That is his field. May I succeed in bringing him to it. If 1840 was Robert Schumann's song year, 1841 would be devoted to orchestral composition. He essentially completed 2.5 symphonies that year. His first, an attempt at a second that became his overture, scherzo, and finale, and the first version of what would later be known as his 4th symphony. The first was written in a blaze of inspiration between January 23rd and 26th. He completed the orchestration less than a month later, and the work was given its premiere in Leipzig under Mendelssohn at the end of March. According to Clara, the first symphony was inspired by the ballad Frühlingsgedicht, literally spring poem, which ends with the couplet, O turn, and change your course. In the valley, spring blooms forth. In using poetry as the starting point for a piece of absolute non-texted music, Schumann was charting a course in symphonic composition that reflected the increasingly literary and descriptive inclinations of composers during the Romantic era. He originally called the piece his Spring Symphony and suggested a narrative by giving each of its movements a descriptive title. The first, titled The Beginning of Spring, is an ebullient allegro with a dramatic introduction that Schumann described as expressing the vernal passion that sways us until we are very old and surprises us each year. The devotionally romantic slow movement was called Evening, while the following scherzo, which contains much of the rustic vigor that would characterize Dvořák's orchestral dance music, was titled Merry Playmates. The symphony closes with a celebratory allegro